On a cold, windy October day in Minnesota, the International Paranormal Society is on the move.
Cemeteries tend to be on the edges of towns. The Romans did this originally because they didn't want the spirits of the dead coming back to interfere with the living. But also during the Victorian period, they thought that the smell of the dead created cholera. This was called miasma. It was smells creating diseases, and you used to have your windows shut at night because the fear of night poison in the air. But of course they purpose-built cemeteries all around London, for example, to take care of this, and it actually cured cholera for a while because of course the bodies are poisoning the water table and it's not the smell at all.
It's very interesting in the Midwest. If you walk around the cemeteries, some of the symbolism actually gives you some historical information as to what happened to those individuals. So if you follow me, we'll be able to look at some of the symbolism of the graveyard. If you ever see columns cut short in a cemetery, or you see cylinders like this, it normally delineates the idea of a life cut short. So in this example, we have two children here. One was born in 1887 and died in 1888. And here we have 1895 to 1900. So this family lost two children very young. So if you see a column cut short or anything that looks like this, it normally means it's a child in a cemetery that's died. As we move through the cemetery, I'm noticing things as we go along here. I love these hands being strengthened here. You often see this as a common symbol of the afterlife, meeting the living. And you've got that sense of coming together. Sometimes the cuffs represent a man and a woman if they're married, but on this occasion it's just the coming together of the afterlife with the living.
I love investigating cemeteries. They're untouched by modernity. No one's knocking them down, no one's building over them. They're exactly how they would have been made back in the day, with all those carvings, all that architecture. So that's worthy of historical merit. Everything else in the town has been lost, yet cemeteries remain the same, almost in a vacuum.
Find trees like this as carvings in a cemetery, and it normally represents that this person belonged to the foresters. So obviously a tree and the idea of an axe as well sometimes comes along, but you get a sense here that this was almost Masonic. There's a sense here of the foresters, if you're aware of that organisation. And if we come around the front here, it's very common to have the Book of Life. So here with the tree we have the Book of Life, and obviously the pages are being turned, and we have four all in a row here, which is quite a nice collection. I've never seen four in a row like this before in any cemetery I've been in. A lot of the symbolism of the cemetery goes back thousands of years, so you often get Roman urns, for example, and classicism in the cemetery. So here's an example of a Roman urn, and you sometimes get that drapery as well. You might see the curtains closing, for example, almost like the end of a stage production, that your life has ended and you're now going to the afterlife. So you sometimes see these urns with drapes over them. But if we pan around over here to my right and in the distance, you can actually see the back of one of those urns with the drapes nicely carved with all of the folds in there. If you get an opportunity to see these kinds of stones as well, we're going to get down low here, but I really like this. This is a finger and it's pointing upwards. It's saying this is where you're going to heaven. Obviously it would be disappointing if the finger was pointing downwards, but we don't see those, of course. I really like the idea of nature versus nurture in the cemetery. Man makes these stones and then nature reclaims them. I just love all the mosses and the lichen and the way the colours are on this. It's just fantastic. It's almost like it's being reclaimed back by nature. And of course you've got these fabulous carvings of the drapes representing the idea of a curtain closing where you're leaving the physical life and going into the afterlife. Whilst we're in the cemetery here, it's worth pointing out that a lot of these stones are at very strange and odd angles, because when you bury a body, over time the coffin collapses and then you have these indentations in the ground that I'm currently standing on, and it means these gravestones then fall forwards because the land has subsided. If you look at the land here, you can see where the coffins have collapsed, and that 2 feet of air where the body was has now sunk into the ground and made everything come in. So be aware as you're walking around. You can also see graves without markers where there's indentations in the ground. 2 months and 7 days. How sad is that? So many children died from smallpox and diphtheria that, you know, if you went through the graveyard and you highlighted all the dates, you could see when the pandemic started in town, because there'd be a big group of people and children that died all roughly around the same time when those epidemics came to town, unfortunately.
After exploring the cemetery, Dr. Lee and his team turned their attention to a very special grave here.
We're here in Henderson right now at this fabulous cemetery, and we're going to try and talk to a gentleman here called Joseph Brown. He was a major during the US Dakota War of 1862, and some say he was responsible for the massacre that took place at the Battle of Birch Coulee. Over 24 troops died in that particular encounter, and over 90 horses were slaughtered. Some say he was responsible for them camping in a really bad position when the Dakota came through and pinned them down for 2 days. But I think Captain Grant, who was in charge of the battalion, even though he wasn't outranked by the major, actually made that decision. So the best thing to do today will be to find out and ask him some questions.
I've spoken with Joseph Brown many times. We spoke at his cabin in Sacred Heart, and also had a discussion with him on the battlefield of Birch Coulee, where lots of other soldiers came through, and we got some really interesting evidence of Birch Coulee, of all the horses that were slaughtered there. We got the sounds of neighing on our EVPs, and two of my team members actually saw a white horse running around the battlefield.
Joseph Brown, you should know who we are by now. We've spoken to you many times in the past. I'm going to jump straight in and ask you the questions that I want answered from the lips of the dead. Can you clarify, were you responsible, yes or no, for where you camped at the Battle of Birch Coulee? I need a nice big yes or no response to that. Someone said it's over. Let me ask again. It is over, it was 1862. But were you responsible for the position of where you camped at Birch Coulee, yes or no? Here we have Heather's got her device here that says "so dark." So interesting words coming through already, we've only just started.
The interesting thing about the dialogue between Major Brown and Captain Grant is there's almost an argument taking place in spirit. You've got them arguing with one another, and we're actually listening to that as one's saying yes, one's saying no, and it's going backwards and forwards.
No. If you said no and I missed it, I do apologise. Can you come through again just to tell me and to clarify? Historically, this is very important. Were you responsible for the position of where you camped at Birch Coulee that facilitated that massacre, yes or no?
Americans captured could refer to Brown's wife and family, who were captured by Chief Little Crow and later released.
Do you ever reside at your house that's in town? The town of Henderson, of course, was named after your mother. It was her maiden name. Are you ever in your house, in spirit, in town? No. Where do you hang out then? Where do you hang out the most? Where do you spend all your time? We're having other equipment verifying what we're doing here.
I don't think Major Brown made that decision. I think it was Captain Grant. Captain Grant was in charge of the battalion. Major Brown was just coming along, and he wasn't actually an army man. He was given his position to help him negotiate better when he was an Indian agent, so he never had a military background. But I can't believe that if you have a lot of troops and there's a captain and a major, that you wouldn't talk amongst yourselves. So I actually have the belief that they had that discussion amongst themselves and made that as a joint decision. So the yes and no going backwards and forwards may reflect the idea that they both had a conversation about that and then decided amongst themselves. It's amazing to talk to someone like Major Brown. This is why I became a historian and a paranormal investigator, to talk to people from another era.
To learn more, find Adrian Lee's book on the U.S. Dakota War on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or wherever books are sold. If you like our content, please consider subscribing to and sharing this channel. Thanks for watching.